Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News focusing on the tragic loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas and delighted to say joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt, Germany. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you in Perth, Australia, Geoffrey.
Thank you. So, listeners, as promised, we're going to be focusing on your questions after our last couple of episodes. Most of those questions, however, have focused on yesterday's episode with the rat out of the bag. So we're going to, or rat out of the box. We're going to get straight into those questions, and there's quite a few of them that we've picked out that reflect the general theme of all the questions we received yesterday. So the first one comes from, and I'm probably going to get the pronunciation wrong, but please bear with me, Kalan Divakai Durubai, 8136. Finally, the rat is out of the box and discrepancies are being identified and more questions raised and gears shifting from the suspected manual transition of the fuel switches to possible misfeed of electrical signals and possible misreading by the FADEC and recording by the CVR. In other words, catastrophic system failure related to power supply and distribution to sensors, thereby no cockpit alert was recorded. PS continue to explore possible electrical and power supplies. Richard.
Yeah, well, very good observation there. Thank you for that. The cat is out of the bag, or the beans are spilt, or the genie is out of the bottle, or the horse is bolted. Something like that is going on. And we're really more focused rather than the idiomatic analysis on the rat deployment. And the first question is, was the rat deployed automatically or manually? And this fact is known from the FDR data, but it's not mentioned in the preliminary report. And the second question is why the rat was deployed. If automatic, we've listed the possible reasons. And if manual, was it precautionary or based on observed electrical or hydraulic failures?
So from only one Naga Baba, finally everyone's starting to dig deeper into the rat timelines. Great job. The AAIB gave so many loose ends that everyone was distracted with all the different information. Need more such good work. And Toto 8923, this episode was really good, showing that the rat was deployed before engine shutdown. Also highlighting the impossible airspeed increase from VR to Vmax 180 in such a short time. However, it could also be that V1 and VR are wrong and was actually faster. That could explain the relatively long roll and also the relative long glide distance after the dual engine failure points towards a higher Vmax. Interesting comments there too.
Yeah, indeed. And so the first comment from only one Naga Baba. Meanwhile, this is the 50th episode we've done on the Air India Flight 171 crash, and we have discussed the rat in 33 episodes up until now. And the first time we discussed the rat was on the 15th of June, and the last time we discussed it was yesterday. And we'll discuss it again today. The preliminary report, as you suggest, has not been very helpful in the rat analysis, to say the least. And to your point, Toto, I don't think V1 and VR are wrong because the values stated match the expected values based on the Boeing documentation. I think the only suspect value is the Vmax value at 180 knots. And I think that is the expected value for a clean configuration. So landing gear retracted, flaps retracted, and rat not deployed. rather than the actual value with all of the drag from the landing gear, the flaps, and the rat being deployed.
James Gulsman, it's 265. Was there a backup pilot crew for this flight on board, or was there someone in the cockpit jump seat not reported?
Oh, that's an interesting question. There was no relief crew on this flight to London, which is scheduled to take 9 hours, 40 minutes gate to gate time. The actual flying time varies between 9 hours, 10 minutes and 10 hours, 15 minutes. India is subject to regulations from the India's Directorate General of Civil Aviation, the DGCA, which imposes a 10-hour maximum flight duty time as a hard limit for pilots on certain long-haul operations. And recently, in two instances, flights from Bengaluru to London on the May 16th and on May 17th, the pilot duty periods exceeded the 10-hour limit, and that prompted disciplinary action by the DGCA, including removal of key crew scheduling executives.
Yeah. Here's one from Brian Mariska, 1615. AAIB appears to be deliberately driving a false narrative by manipulating data and the presentation of that data. The entire incident seems to be moving in the direction of an extremely poorly maintained aircraft suffering a massive electrical stuttering incident at takeoff, triggering rat deployment, and seconds later shutting off engine fuel valves. One critical issue which everyone, including this channel, is avoiding is the issue of whether the FADEC or some element of the flight control system is capable of moving those cockpit fuel levers. The universal implication for all reporting sources is that this is not being considered because it is not possible. Yet no one has bothered to adduce actual systems engineering evidence of the assumption. A mechanically neglected aircraft suffering a main electrical power failure and the supposed fault tolerance of the 787 was unable to recover normal function in time, resulting in this disaster. Multiple layer of risk here, but the ineffectual fault tolerance of the aircraft is actually far and away the most dangerous. That's a bit heavy.
Yeah, strong stuff, Brian. And we do understand that not all viewers have the time to watch all 50 episodes we've done on Air India. And that is why we've included a link in the description below to frequently asked questions. We have stated in many episodes that the fuel switches can only be moved physically and mechanically in the cockpit and cannot be moved automatically by any aircraft system. I refer you to episode 154, 162, and 169 in particular. And also, please take a look at the FAQ linked in the description below. This is in the description of every video. It talks about the manual fuel switch operation, and I quote, "The run cutoff switches themselves are not motorized and cannot be physically moved automatically by the avionics, FADEC, or any thrust management system." There's another section on the FADEC function, a complete description of the FADEC function from the Boeing and GE documentation. And we have discussed the FADEC function in 24 previous episodes.
And one of the things we should reinforce again to viewers, Richard, is that there's about 1,180 787s flying at the moment, and they perform about 2,100 flights a day. Now, that's an enormous amount of experience and knowledge, operational, understanding of the aircraft. And the plane's been flying in commercial service now, what, for 13 years. So, you know, it's a bit, it's not fair to say that the plane's got lots of problems because it clearly does not have lots of problems. It has virtually no problems whatsoever. Certainly, there's been a couple of incidents, but that's about all. Did you agree?
Yeah, I think they had some earlier teething problems, especially with the lithium battery. There have been, I think, a total of 30 ADs,
Mm,
um, but that's over 13 and a half years. So,
yeah.
at that rate, the statistics, when you compare to other aircraft, the
Mm,
777 or the 747 or the Airbus aircraft, I think the 787 is looking pretty damn good
very,
from from the
yeah.
statistics.
So, Harry HQ8FI, these guys are relentless in their search for the truth. DGCA, AAIB India need to relinquish the lead of the investigation. ICAO needs to observe the investigation and, once completed, audit the regulator. That's a strong statement.
Yeah, it is a strong statement. And, we are also accused of not being relentless by some people and even ignoring key aspects of the investigation by some. When we conclude the preliminary report is making any accurate statements, then we're accused of being naive. And when we say the report is inadequate, we're accused of being racial or Western or
Mm,
something else. So, yeah, Harry, I quite agree. ICAO do observe the investigation and they need to step in if they think there's something going wrong.
yeah. So, Atara P5, in another video, you said you were not sure what was meant by the rack began providing hydraulic power. Are the 6 seconds necessary for the onset of hydraulic power? Who is responsible for the actual wording of the report? Do they choose one poor person who has to put all the facts into words, or do they decide together how to phrase the report?
Well, we don't actually know the process. We assume that all the investigators in the investigation team are party to that report and review the various drafts of the report. But we don't know for sure. What we have pointed out is the word about is used 15 times, and the word approx is used 5 times in the preliminary report. And what we actually stated in episode 164 was the preliminary report is a bit vague and states the rat hydraulic pump began supplying hydraulic power at about 08:08:47, quote unquote. The word about I take to mean plus or minus a second, but it could be something different. And the phrase began supplying hydraulic power is is very vague. And it takes 6 to 7 seconds from when it starts to when it is fully supplying hydraulic power. It takes another 4 seconds after that to produce stable electric power, according to the Boeing documentation. And, the word began or about or approximately really doesn't fit because they know very precisely from the FDR data, which goes down to the nearest 125 milliseconds.
Mm. Yes, it's really a major problem, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Colin Bailey, 5672, your assumption about the RAT deployment and this 7 to 9 second delay from deployment to providing hydraulic power may be wrong. What you may be missing is that immediately after deployment of the RAT, the propeller will start spinning and accelerating, thus will begin to provide hydraulic pressure. The hydraulic pressure will increase as the propeller accelerates. The 7 to 9 second specification is the time necessary to achieve sufficient RPM to deliver sufficient hydraulic pressure. All hydraulic pumps operate this way and take a few moments to build up sufficient pressure for operation. The report from the EAFR data that hydraulic pressure began being supplied most likely indicates the rise of pressure as the rat spins up. This would happen within a second or two of deployment. If this is the case, then the timeline works perfectly. I would really value your feedback and analysis so much more if you would consult and interview pilots, engineers and technicians that are knowledgeable and experienced with the 787 when devising your theories that deal with timing and operational specs. You go off on some really wild theories and, like I said before, seem to be searching for an improbable cause. Well, we actually do have a range of 787 engineers we talk to, and we also have 787 check and training captains that we talk to as well, to consult with our analysis. And of course, Richard is an aerospace engineer, aren't you, Richard?
Yeah, and we have all the Boeing documentation, the GE documentation, the FAA and the NTSB and the EASA. There's a huge amount out there. And as you said, when we do check with a Qantas captain or with a Boeing 787 engineer, before we make any statements, and we haven't come to a conclusion. And in answer to Colin, I would say, Colin, you are a long time and frequent commenter. You can pick up from other comments, whether this comes from a pilot or an engineer with actual experience on the Boeing 787. And our statement yesterday, all available Boeing data asserts that the rat requires 6 to 7 seconds post-deployment to provide full hydraulic power and 10 seconds to provide electrical power, stable electrical power, under optimum conditions is not an assumption. It is taken from the Boeing documentation.
Absolutely. I mean, we take this incredibly seriously, and we go backwards and forwards and check this, check that. The things we say are not said lightly at all. So Stephen Ferris, 5133, bingo, and exactly what I've been saying repeatedly as recently as yesterday. The critical importance of the rat triggering initial deployment time as a fundamental fork in the road regarding the direction the investigation should take, i.e. focus on a something else, fire, electronic glitch, etc., as the underlying starting point in the ensuing chain of events leading to the catastrophe, versus all the arguments pro or con regarding the role of the pilots and the infamous fuel cutoff switch transitions, which are looking more and more like the proverbial red herring. That's a contrary view.
Yeah. And actually, Stephen, I don't think the fuel switches are a complete red herring. In my view, the fuel switches were not the first cause, but an effect of that first cause. And the first cause, as other viewers have pointed out, is quite likely a catastrophic electrical or hydraulic issue, which caused the rat to deploy. And tomorrow we're going to start down that path, and we're going to be looking firstly at the effect of water ingress into the EE bay and how that can cause a catastrophic electrical failure. But there are other scenarios apart from water ingress that we need to look at.
So Michael Barber, 5651, the rat deployed the second the plane transitioned to air mode. What you have confirmed has also been confirmed using trigonometry based on the position of the aircraft on the airfield. It was also confirmed now a third time using the picture and mathematically approximating the height and thus the clock timeline of the plane. The picture shows the height of the plane where the rat deployed is only 145 feet off the ground, and that height is visible less than the actual length of the aircraft. You can use your own eyes and see the plane has barely taken off. The rat deployment is a smoking gun, and the engines were not cut off intentionally by the pilots, and therefore engines were set to cut off. The rat deployment is a symptom of the problem and could even be a proximal cause as to why the jets turned off in the first place. Also, think about this. The rat deployment provides yet even more drag to prevent maximum speed that you are referring to. The energy has to come from somewhere.
Well, that's all very true. And from our analysis of the picture provided in the preliminary report, we conclude that the altitude of the aircraft was around 100 feet, plus or minus 25 feet. So we're not far apart in our analysis, Michael. You have to use, in my view, the dimensions of the aircraft, as you've done, the alignment to the runway, and the perspective of the camera. And if you look carefully in the picture, there are lines in the concrete base plates in the picture foreground. And these base plate lines can give you the camera perspective, which we work out as 40 degrees to the latitudinal, 45 degrees to the longitudinal, and 5 degrees to the vertical. And if you do the 3D maths, you will come to about 100 feet, plus or minus 25. And we have discussed the drag of the rat and the flaps and the landing gear at length in previous episodes.
So Garth White, 4827, rat requires a minimum of 180 KIS to provide electrical and hydraulic power. The rat could have been accidentally deployed during pre-flight. No warning except overhead light.
The rat starts spinning as soon as it enters the slipstream. It can even be deployed on the runway at any airspeed. And there is no minimum airspeed in the Boeing documentation. Obviously, the greater the airspeed, then the higher the rotation of the rat turbine and the more hydraulic power and electrical power it will produce. I do not believe the rat was accidentally deployed. The switch on the overhead panel has a protective cover, and you have to first lift that protective cover in order to be able to press the switch. So it's not something you do accidentally.
So Boondoggle 404, according to Boeing chart published 10 years ago, the Dreamliner is capable of an acceleration 8 knots second, 10 seconds after it starts moving. So claiming that 6 knots per second is aerodynamically impossible is pure BS. 6 knots a second acceleration at 9 seconds of flight is aligned with Boeing's chart perfectly. What do you think of that?
Thank you, Boondoggle, but I'm actually not talking pure BS. The aircraft reportedly accelerated from V2 162 knots to Vmax 180 knots in 3 seconds. And work that out. It just doesn't fit. And the memo I wrote states this is aerodynamically impossible at the takeoff weight of 213,401 kilos with flaps 5, gear extended, rat deployed, and a hot and high density altitude conditions. Therefore, we challenge the plausibility of the official report and its timeline. our two positions are actually not contradictory. The difference is I'm accounting for the aircraft weight, configuration, and speed regime, and you're quoting from a chart which does not take into account the aircraft weight, configuration, and speed regime.
Mm. So Mark Lamb, 7150. Gents, 11 days ago I commented on your cautions and warnings episode with regard to the perhaps erroneous deployment of the RAT and that this deployment may have interfered with the aircraft systems such that it led the pilot to cycle the fuel switches from run to cut off and back to run. My inference was that the RAT deployed prior to the loss of thrust from both engines, not as a result of the loss of thrust and associated loss of electrical and hydraulic power. Although I am mindful of the large amount of responses you have received, it was unfortunate and somewhat disappointing that I had no response from yourselves or anyone else within this community. I was just putting it out there, and it seemed to be assumed that the RAT deployment was a result of loss of engines and not the actual cause of the events following its deployment. Today's episode now casts doubt on when the RAT was actually deployed, and we need to look at what effect this would have on systems that until that point appeared to be running normally. Perhaps you can investigate this, please. Great work again, guys.
Well, Mark, rest assured we are investigating, and your inference is correct. And we must apologize, but with over 1,000 comments and emails and SMSs and phone calls every day, we can't get to every single one, but we try to get to the major issues that are raised by many different viewers. The RAT, as you say, was actually deployed and before the fuel switches were moved to cutoff. And the big question is why the RAT was deployed. And we're investigating the possibilities. We're starting tomorrow with water ingress into the EE bay, but there are other scenarios which are possible.
So, Richard, from Don Stewart 323, outstanding analysis. Thanks to you too for keeping the investigation alive. The AAIB credibility is in the toilet. Is it time to take another look at the maintenance log from the previous flight and rethink the troubles that passengers were reporting during that flight, AC failure, power spikes, etc., to add to our list of potential failure scenarios for this flight? I smell a rat.
Yeah, I think a lot of people smell a rat, Don, so you have good company. The problems the passengers reported on the previous flight were related to the cabin service electrics, and they are actually separate and separately supplied than the avionics that run the aircraft. But you say the credibility is in the toilet. Well, actually, the toilet might prove to be the original cause. And that's why we're looking at the water ingress from the forward toilet into the EE bay, the forward EE bay, tomorrow.
And we should mention that Boeing put out service bulletins and whatnot. I think, or it might have even been an AD about that water issue from that toilet about a year
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah, there was an AD in 2024, and there was a reminder recently to please check
Mm.
all of the seals and all of the possible water leakage and seepage in order to prevent any leakage or seepage into the EE bay.
So Ralph Elderbach, I have not reviewed all the information relating to the crash timeline, but I would like to suggest that even though both of you gentlemen are very distinguished looking, it would be much better to leave the numerical data tables on the screen longer during your discussions. A little less face time for both of you would not make your channel less interesting and valuable. If I understand what was said here, the rat deployed before the fuel was cut off from the engines. However, that might have occurred. If that is accurate, how did it take so long after the PR was released for this to be noticed? This seems incredible. Did I miss something? The there's certain there certainly do seem to be too many questions about how the PR, that's preliminary report, was compiled. The families of all the victims deserve far better from the Indian government. This unfortunate incident is looking more and more like a duck with every passing day.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, Ralph. The technical memo is available for download in the description. So even when the screenshot is only shown briefly, you can still refer to the technical memo at your leisure. Um, or if you want, you can just hit pause at that point, and then you can stare at the table as long as you like. We have been discussing the issue about rat deployment since the 15th of June and in a total of 33 episodes. So, it's not something that you've missed or is incredible. It reminds me of the joke about the biggest island in the world in the southern hemisphere before Australia was discovered. And the answer is Australia, because it's actually irrelevant to the fact that it's the biggest island in the southern hemisphere, whether it was discovered or not. So there you go.
So Jackson 3967, the timing of the rat deployment has been the main thing that many people posting here have been focused on from day one of the report being issued. I would go so far as to say that it's the primary reason I'm here at all. The timing is central to everything. It is obvious it's it's been obvious from day one the logic doesn't add up unless maybe you accept that the rat can start delivering power almost immediately. Even then, it's a close thing. I've watched every one of your videos basically because something is clearly not right.
That's a good reason to watch the videos, and a lot is not right and misleading and vague and perplexing and quite frankly weird in what we've been fed so far in the preliminary report and the various statements leaked to the press around that report.
Yeah. Julia Holland, 7947, thank you so much. Because of you guys, people are starting to realise this is not pilot fault. I feel that very deeply. Even families from the accident feel that it was not pilot error. Great job.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Julia. But we haven't actually come to any final conclusion on this channel, and we're still investigating and uncovering more and more as time goes on. It feels a bit like peeling layers off an onion, to be honest, and we don't seem to get to the end. As soon as we peel another layer off, we find yet another layer underneath.
So, in conclusion, Richard, Rob Malaya, 2971, superb analysis. Thank you, gents. Nice way to
Yeah, well,
finish off.
yeah, thank you, Rob. And I must say thank you to all the other viewers as well. It's a combined team effort going on here to solve this mystery.
So, viewers, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much for watching. We really do appreciate it. Thank you for subscribing. And if you don't, please do. Please like us. Please keep the comments coming. And please keep those questions coming. They're absolutely fantastic. So, Richard, thank you for all your work today on answering these questions. There's been some great questions there, which really do hit the mark. And as you suggested, tomorrow we'll be back with the looking at the water issue on the 787. So thank you again, Richard.
You're welcome.
Thank you, viewers.